In this video, we're going to review how to mount the encoders to the drive wheels, and also how to mount the potentiometer to the arm. So in a previous announcement, we had asked you to move all these bearing blocks one hole or a half an inch. The holes are spaced a half inch apart. So we asked you to move them towards the rear of the robot. So if you did that, then it should look like this. And the front of the robot, which is over here, this wheel right here, the front wheel should be tangent, or the tangent of the front wheel should be even with the front of the frame of the robot, if it's done correctly. So if all these things are positioned correctly, then it should look like this. We've also sent you hardware so that you can use half-inch 832 screws with the kep nuts to attach the bearing blocks rather than the pop rivets. You can still use the pop rivets if you prefer to use the pop rivets. I found them that I prefer to use the screws instead. And to get the pop rivets out, you can just take a screwdriver and kind of push on the end of it until the head on this side pops out a little bit. Let's see if you can see that. Right, so now I can just get the screwdriver underneath here and pop that, just get that a little bit further out so that I can pull this out. Okay, so you can reuse these. You just push them back in the way you did when you first put them in. But I prefer to actually use these, the half-inch. And sometimes it's a little tricky to get your fingers in there. You may want to get a pair of needle nose pliers like this. Makes it a little easier to hold the nut. Okay, and so I'm just going to put this together. Oops. Okay, so that's all tight. And then we've sent you some 4-inch long shafts. So the shafts that are on the original wheels here are 3 inches long. They're not long enough to drive the encoder. So the shaft that I have here is actually 6 inches. We sent you a 4-inch shaft. So, but before we try to put that on, we're going to mount the encoder. So the encoders, we've sent you these 3D printed mounting brackets, and you can see the way that these go on. You have, here are 2 7/8 long bolts that go through, so you can just put them through the slots. You don't have to tighten them up real tight at this point, and just put them on so that this round area right here matches up with that rounded surface on the encoder. And so now we have to mount these on here, and so you might, again, I'm going to just use a half-inch screw to do this. And so I'm just going to get this ready. So what I might actually do is put the screw through first. Okay, and then I want to have the nut ready. Of course, this is a little tricky because I'm trying to do it upside down here. But so we can get this through and put this through the hole here. And then I'm going to get a nut ready with my needle nose pliers. Okay, so again, don't tighten that up very tight at this point. So we'll just leave that a little bit loose. And So now we'll be able to take our wheel, and again we just have the collar on one end. Put that through. Make sure you include a spacer here. Right, put the spacer in, and then the gear, and now we're going to put this through, and okay, so I'm just going to hold the collar on one side and put that through, and then just gently get this lined up in the encoder. And I'm going to push the collar back up against the bearing that will keep the wheel in the right spot, and then just tighten up the collar. Okay, so now, all right, we have this set up properly here. Okay, so now we just want to make sure this turns. Again, the encoder, we don't want any kind of stress being put on that by the axle. So I'm just going to try and get that in kind of a neutral position, and then finish tightening up everything up. All right, so that's ready. And you can see that's all set. Okay, so now we're going to turn this over. All right, and we have our encoders set up, and they have two. Right, if we look at the, let's see if you can see that. Okay. All right, so these are going to go into the digitals. You put them side by side. So in my particular case, I have them set in an 11 and a 12 for one side, and on the other side I have them set in a 1 and a 2. Okay, so those are and these are the digital, so these are the digital pins, the digital inputs here, and again the two encoders go side by side. You have two 3-pin plugs, put them next to each other on the digital inputs. So okay, so that's in pretty good shape now. And so the next thing we want to do is you can put on the battery. We had to move those up to make room for the encoders, and you're going to receive a bar right here. Okay, and this one is longer than it needs to be. Yours should be the right size. So you can just mount the battery holder up over there. Okay, and then the other thing we need to do is put the potentiometer on. And in order to do that, okay, we're going to have to take this C channel. So your current configuration has a C channel where it's facing out, right? In other words, the open part of the C is facing out, and the bearings are on this side, right? So basically what you want to do is take the one on the left side of the robot off and turn it around so that the open part of the C is facing towards the center of the robot, and then the bearings, instead of being on the outside of the C, will be inside the C. So you can see on the top. So that all goes together like that. And then we have another 4-inch axle that's going to go through on the top, and you'll have this bearing on the top, on the inside. So you don't want the potentiometer, to support the axle, right? So in other words, we're going to have a 7/8 screw that goes through the bearing on the top part of the bearing, and that's going to hold this screw right here. So that's going to be our adjustment for the encoder. Okay, that'll be our adjustment for the encoder. And so again, just to review, instead of the C channel facing out from the robot, I'm just going to turn that around so it's facing in. You're going to put these bearings on the inside of the C rather than on this one. They're on this side. They're on the outside of the C. Okay, and then for the this hole right here, right, which goes through. Right, you have your bearing right in here, inside there. Okay, and you have a screw that's going through, a 7/8 long, 7/8 bolt, so that you can then adjust the encoder. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about how to adjust the encoder. Okay, so what you'll want to do is loosen this up. Right, loosen that up, and so this is adjustable. Now you want to make sure that you don't go past the hard stops inside the encoder, right? Because that you can break the encoder. Oh, I'm sorry, no, this isn't an encoder. It's a potentiometer. I keep calling that an encoder. So that's the potentiometer. So what I would do is, oops. Is move the arm all the way down. Okay, so put it in the very lowest position, and then you want to adjust this. If you move this, and you feel the stops, obviously you don't want to go past the stops. So what we're going to do is, where this is all the way down, in terms of the travel, right, the shaft has gone as far as it can go this way, right? So it's going as far as it can go that way. So we want as much travel as possible. So the way that mine is set up right now, I don't feel the hard stops at any point along here. Okay, so we want to rotate this so that it can rotate as far as back the other way as possible. So in other words, right now it's rotated this way, right? It's seated down, and we want to be able to rotate it as far as possible the other way. So in other words, if we want to have this so that it can rotate as far as possible, this part in here can rotate this way as far as possible, right? I don't want to go this way because I'm using up some of that travel. So I would want to actually move it all the way this way, right? So in other words, see, this can move freely like this. If I move it all the way this way and then have the arm go back this way, I might run out of travel. So if I rotate it as far as I can this way, right? In other words, I'm rotating it this way. So now the arm will have a lot of travel. When the arm comes up, it would be the same as, if the arm rotates up this way, it would be the same as rotating this way with the arm stationary. Okay, so if I move this all the way this way, right, I know this can rotate back this way, but instead this is going to be stationary, and it's going to be the arm that comes the other way around. So basically I want to just tighten that up in that spot, and you might have to, you know, put like one of the other Allen wrenches down to try and hold the nut in position right there. Okay, so at this point now we have the encoder, I'm sorry, the potentiometer set up, and if we follow that line back, okay, you can see that is going into analog. Right, so we have that plugged into analog number one analog right there. All right, so now as we move the arm up and down, we'll be able to determine the value of the potentiometer that each position that the arm moves to. And of course, we'll be able to keep count on the wheels now because we have encoders. So that will help us in turning and also help us in going straight. We'll be able to count the ticks on the encoders for each side and keep the robot going straight. All right, so I thought it might be a good idea just to take this apart and show you how to remount this arm. So what I'm going to do is loosen up these collars. Okay, and then we'll push the axle out here, and okay. All right, so this gives you a good view of the, let's see, so I'm just going to take that out, of what's going on here. So the one side, this side hasn't been changed at all, but this side, you can see the C channel is now facing towards the center of the robot, and we have the bearing set up. Right, we have this lower bearing which has the pinions, the small gears on it, and then this upper bearing. We have a 1/2 inch or the regular right 1/2 inch bolt going through here, and then right this one on the top one, which is for the adjustment for the potentiometer. This screw right here, that's a 7/8 832. So that's 7/8 of an inch long. So we go through and you can get that set up, and so you can keep that somewhat loose so that this can be adjusted back and forth here. Okay, so that's what it looks on the inside, and we want to when we want to put the motor back on. Okay, we're going to come through on this side, and then we'll add a collar. On that side, and then we'll go ahead and put the axle through. And then on this side, we want to be able to get this collar in there. So I think I'll go ahead and use some needle nose pliers. Whoops. Maybe I can actually hold it like this and push that axle through some more. Okay, and then put it through the bearing, and then just adjust the again, you want to keep this a little bit loose, make it a little bit easier. Okay, and push that axle the rest of the way through. And so now that we have this through, we can tighten up our collars. Okay, so we have this in. On this side, we'll pretty much want to keep the this collar not too much of a gap here, so we'll tighten up that collar on this side, and this collar, let's see if you can see that. With this collar, you want to push that up against, so in other words, you have this collar is basically acting as a spacer, but that set screw is holding the axle in place there. And then on this side, leave a little bit of gap so that you have a little bit of clearance here, right? Because this C channel is facing in towards the gear, so we want to make sure it doesn't catch on any teeth. So now we can just go ahead and tighten that up. Okay. So that gives you an idea how to do that, and then as we discussed in the previous earlier in this video, how you can then adjust the position of the potentiometer. The other thing I think we never mentioned is on the pinion down here. So let me see if I can give you a decent look at that. So in this pinion right in here, the one that's on the same side as the motor, again, because the C channel is now facing towards the gears, you might want to put some washers or some extra space in here to make sure that this pinion stays lined up properly with the big gear, right? So in other words, if there's too much of a gap there, then you can add some spacer or 3D print your own spacer to the right width, so that you want to make sure that these two pinions stay lined up with the big gears. The other thing is you want to make sure that these two tabs, I don't know, maybe you want to maybe they'll be okay if you just push them under there. You want to make sure that those don't get stuck in the teeth when the motor's running. So let's see how that works. So we have those down there. Yeah, that seems to work pretty well. So in other words, once the battery's in there, you can just push these down, maybe underneath the bearings there, or just tie wrap them down a little bit so they stay away from the gears. Okay, so I think that should do it.